Welcome to the Private Lenders Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey everyone, Chris and Jason here. Thanks for checking out the show. Today we're talking some underwriting stuff. So the reality of the private lending business is that if you do enough loans, you're going to end up with defaults. And these defaults teach you stuff about your underwriting, right? And sometimes you are totally accurate with your judgment going into a particular deal. And sometimes you learn that you made a mistake or two in your underwriting process, and what you thought was the case maybe became something else. So we're going to dive into some examples right now.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense to kind of go through some of the things that we look at inside our business. And we discuss the 4 C's of underwriting, which is, and typically it's an order of importance, but they kind of do all overlap: collateral, character, capacity, and credit. But I think sometimes you'd be surprised, right? Like what we've learned is you can have a really, really good project in general, like a good buy, like a good acquisition. The numbers make sense on paper, but you just have a lousy operator and they just bring that entire project crashing down. A bad operator will ruin an entirely good, perfect deal. And on the other side, sometimes you might have a deal where the margins are very slim, but you have a really, really good operator and they figure out a way to make it work. And a lot of the times, the tricky part about, I think, this business in general is if you've just entered this business in the last decade, you've only seen growth. And what I mean by that is the market has been appreciating. So you could have been doing bad deals all along and not even realizing they were bad deals because they were performing, meaning they were paying off. When I say performing, they're paying off, right? Because, you did a 130 loan on a $200,000 asset, give or take, or maybe you did a 150 loan on a $200,000 asset because you gave high leverage, and then that asset sold for 225. So, the market appreciated, quick enough to get yourself out of trouble. So I would definitely do a check on yourself and on your business in our current market, because I doubt things are going to continue to just go up and up and up and up. Things change. But that being said, the thing to keep in mind about this business is we're doing first liens, right? We're doing first mortgages. They're secured. They're collateralized. The lender should have the least amount of risk in the entire real estate transaction, the least amount of risk. And there's never 100% no risk, but it damn near should be 90%, 99% of no low risk if you structure these things accordingly. And what we've noticed it now, we've noticed in the past, we noticed it, early on in our careers, is kind of what we started with is, a bad borrower will bring down a good project. And typically, if you know how to comp and you know the areas that you're lending in, you typically should never have a collateral problem, right? Is that safe to say, Chris? Like, you typically should not have a collateral problem if you're lending on median housing prices in median neighborhoods in, populated areas. And for the most part, how to pull comps, or you're comfortable with those areas. As long as you're structuring the loan accordingly or correctly, and you have 35% built-in equity throughout kind of the loan. And when I say that, it's not just based off ARV. No one has an after repair value problem ever, or you shouldn't ever have an after repair value problem. If you do, that's an issue, meaning that
that's very unusual.
Yeah. Meaning, and what I mean by that is if the property's on the market ready to get sold for $200,000 and your loan's higher than 130, you have an ARV problem. That means that you lent too much to begin with, or you didn't value the after repair value correctly, right? So there always should be 35% equity cushion. I know some people push it to 30% equity. 35% is ideal in that case. So that's part of it, right? Most people don't have ARV issues. A lot of people have as is value issues, where day one they're lending 100% financing or 90% financing, maybe even 80+% financing, and day one, they're in at $100,000 loan on $100,000 as is value property. That's an issue. And a lot of people also have an issue when, let's just call it like middle of the project value, where they're halfway done the project and they don't have enough equity throughout that. You need to have enough equity throughout the whole project, right? But yeah, I think
Here's another quick way to look at that. And just to make this one crystal clear for a lot of people who are given higher leverage. The right loan amount on a property is if that person walks away at any point during day one, say they walk away, you're going to be okay. You're going to get your money back. You're going to cover legal fees and other advances. You're not going to lose money. Might not be a windfall, probably won't. But that's the right loan amount. They can walk away. You're not going to lose money. And think about that. Like if some people who are doing, 90% financing on a $200K project, right? So they're doing $180K and then they have a holdback and somebody walks away. You only have 20 grand in equity cushion. That's not enough. Trust me, we go through these deals and, the interest accrual, hopefully you get that back. Legal fees, maybe you pay the property taxes, maybe you probably pay their insurance at some point. And there's only 20 grand to go around. You're probably losing money. And that's why the 90-10 model from the institutional people, or 90-100 model, I should say, 90 of acquisition, 100% of construction, is very, very risky.
Yeah. And they're trying to overcome their risk similar to a bank where they're guarantor heavy and they're borrower quality heavy. And I get that, right?
Oh yeah.
But we need to be everything heavy. Collateral, borrower, the overall project, like everything needs to be on our side. And there's no real excuse of, well, I don't get those types of deals, because there's deals like that are being had in every market, right? And it's a marketing issue. Go out and find more opportunities. That's in order to get more and more and more and more, to do that, right? Like, listen, there's unlimited deals out there for somebody who wants high leverage and cheap terms, right? If that's the game that you're in and you want to give somebody the highest leverage possible and the cheapest terms ever, you can deploy $1 billion in this space. But that's not the goal for us, private lenders and hard money lenders that are trying to, run a tight, profitable operation. It's to do good deals to the right borrowers on the right collateral in the right areas that are going to perform with less headaches and little headaches. If you've been in this business for only a few years, you probably don't have many defaults yet or little headaches, right? Because it takes time. But as you grow and scale, like, headaches will come. And I can promise you that, a default is equivalent to like 10x the amount of work as a performing deal, besides the headaches of having to deal with it. Like, that's not the business model. I feel like back in the day, a lot of people had the mentality of, oh, we're just a loan to own lender. We'll just lend whatever we're willing to buy the property. We're willing to buy or own the property at. Like that, those numbers don't shake out. They really don't. Doesn't work. Go buy properties yourself then and go spend the heavy lifting. Like, don't use this as an acquisition strategy. Use this as a cash flow machine strategy that's going to spit out very good passive returns. And you want your money working. Especially depending on what type of capital, that you have. So the goal is to make sure you're doing the right deals over and over and over and over and over. And yes, collateral by far is the most important thing. We all know that, right? These are collateralized loans. We're not giving unsecured money to people. We're giving collateralized loans, and everything's backed by the collateral. And if your collateral's in correctly, you shouldn't ever lose, money or principal. Ideally, if you're structured the right way, you shouldn't. Now, that being said, working with the right borrowers is super important, because again, bad borrowers will bring down a good project 95% of the time.
The other C's, the 3 other C's, are all borrower stuff.
Yep. Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you got 3 C's that are borrower stuff, and if you do enough loans, you figure out who performs and who doesn't, right? And I think people really just end up learning this from experience. Like, we can tell you on a podcast, somebody can tell you at a conference or whatever, but I think you do have to experience it, because sometimes it looks good going in. A borrower, whatever their, financial situation is, experience, how they present, stuff like that. And then maybe it works out different, and you start to put that into your algorithm of underwriting borrowers. And you're like, okay, I've seen a similar looking borrower and it didn't work out so great, right? And sometimes it's different than you think. Sometimes there are, for example, like curveballs, like contractor types who are, contractors can be all over the map. Some of them might not be quite as buttoned up and professional, but they do have cash and they'll bang through a job and do it great. Right. And over time you start to learn who's who. But like Jason started with, it is very, very true that a bad borrower can bring down a good project, and you along with it. And you'll be scraping out as a first mortgage lender in a okay position, and you'll probably be okay, right? Because this business model is set up to take a small amount of risk. But man, borrowers, just like tenants, if you've been in that business, like a good one versus a bad one is a completely different deal.
Yeah. And I think if you're asking, well, how do I know if it's a good borrower versus a bad borrower? There's lots of different ways that you can, determine that judgment factor. And to us, the most important way is honestly like meeting them and communicating with them and, having, being intuitive and determining like, hey, do I trust this person? Yes, we pull credit. Sometimes we pull background checks. Obviously, we're looking at bank statements and experience and background and to see if we think that they're able to, perform on this. You can learn a lot by just kind of, talking to the borrower themselves. And if you're not in a position that you can meet them in person, do a Zoom call with them because anybody can do that. That's the same as a phone call, and just do it visually and talk to them and ask them questions and, see what direction the conversation is and communicate with them. Like it goes so far to be able to do that. And obviously, we all pride ourselves in wanting to do repeat borrowers over and over and over because they're easy, clean ways to continue to grow the business, and they end up performing very, very well. And that's okay. So to just do the heavy lifting on the front end with the first borrower. And that's not to say that no borrower is ever going to trick you, scam you, whatever. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. The point is try to eliminate that by, putting in the extra work, meeting them at the property, asking them questions related to their draw schedule, asking them questions, what's up? I mean, we've had very good performing borrowers that have legit gotten foreclosed on a year ago from another lender. And we've also had, people that were awful that had high 700 credit scores that, don't know what time it is, right? Like but I think pulling credit is extremely important. And the majority of the time that can be good indicators for a lot of things. For instance, if they have bad credit and they don't really have other means to get cash if the deal falls apart, right? They're not refinanceable. They're not going to be able to get some sort of HELOC or bank loan if they go over construction budget. So that's tough, right? And sometimes that tells a story, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think the best way to do that is just meeting people and learning and, chatting with them and seeing what it is. If it's the first time they're doing a project and it's a $200,000 construction budget, ask them how in the heck they think they're going to be able to perform on that, right? And maybe they can. Right? Maybe they have a background that, hey, I was I'm a GC for this big, builder, and this is what I do every day. I just never done one for myself. Okay, that might be the answer. The other answer might be like, oh, well, my mentor told me this is a good deal because he's wholesaling it to me, and he's going to make money on it as well, and he's going to coach me along the way, and he's going to send me his contractors to help me with it. Right? That might not be the best answer. So it's hard, for us to give you exact situation. It's intuitive, right? Like we all have relationships with people in this space, borrowers, capital investors, vendors. You got to have relationships with these borrowers. I think it goes a long way by just meeting them and kind of seeing what's up. And you can just learn a lot from people sometimes just by looking at their deal, right? If they're overpaying for a project, right? Maybe they don't know what they're doing. They're probably going to be overpaying for construction, and maybe they're not making the right decision. So again, collateral is the most important thing. There's no doubt. We're doing secured loans here. Let's get, the more skin in the game that the borrower has, the better, right? Try to keep your LTVs as low as possible, but don't underestimate the quality of the borrower. And like what Chris said earlier, the first C is for collateral, and the other 3 C's, character, capacity, and credit, are all borrower driven and equally as important.
One quick note before we wrap up here. I was just thinking about, as you were talking we were having a conversation at one of the inner circle meetings in the past. I think it was Dallas in May, where one of the lenders in the group doesn't pull credit, and they said that they don't really believe in that number. It's just a number. Numbers don't mean everything. And that's true. I agree with that. But in addition to the number on a credit report, you have history. You see what kinds of trade lines they have, the credit they've used in the past. whether or not they pay them. Do they owe their own home? Do they have a mortgage on it? Have they gotten bank money for other real estate deals? All that stuff kind of tells a story, right? So like, I wouldn't make the mistake of writing off credit as we don't need it. We're collateral only kind of thing. Hope you guys got some value from this. If you haven't done so already, please go check out hardmoneymastermind.com. We're in there along with about 2,700 other lenders. We hope to see you there, and we'll see you next time here on the podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard